Hey folks, Joshua Laycock here. It's gorgeous afternoon, getting towards the end of the year. It's been an interesting few days, always has been. I wanted to talk a little bit today about something that I find really fascinating that I don't know that the majority of the people in the world think about or pay a lot of attention to. And I talk a lot about emotions. Probably because I'm someone who, through most of my life, I've been controlled by my emotions. They've run pretty wild. That happens to a lot of people. And I've worked a lot at trying to understand them better and control them. We've talked about that's not the same as suppressing them, but to control them and to make sure that they don't control you. But I want to make a distinction, because when I talk about emotions and trying to control emotions, and then it morphs into a conversation perhaps of stoicism. The thing that the rebuttal that a lot of people make, because they don't want to or just can't sort of get their heads around this concept, or they give really extreme examples. Well, what happens if your mother dies? You're not allowed to feel sad? Well, first of all, you're allowed to do whatever the hell you want as long as you're not breaking the rules, breaking the law. But this concept of, so it leads down a path of, as I've said now ad nauseum, and you guys are getting sick of hearing it, you're allowed to feel emotions. You're supposed to feel emotions. That's what emotions are there for, so that you feel something and that you understand something that has happened and they react. But there are kind of two types of emotions that I'm reading about and learning about, and I'm by no means an expert on this, but I've spent a little bit of time, probably more than the average person, is this concept of natural emotion versus manufactured emotions. And they do absolutely exist. And it is the world of yeah buts, but this is how I view them, and this is how it has worked for me. There are situations in life which will, yes, naturally trigger, naturally create an emotional response in your body immediately. The death of a loved one will make you sad. Pain being an emotion. Someone punches you, you cut yourself. That the emotion of pain and feeling like that, that's natural. If you are lost, there's going to be an emotion of panic. That's natural. But what happens is, it's kind of interesting. If you acknowledge those natural emotions, if you say, body, brain, I hear you, let's feel this for a few minutes, or however long, depending, of course, on the severity of what you're dealing with, but a reasonable amount of time. I hear you, let's investigate this. Thanks for the heads up that something has happened, good or bad. Those natural emotions tend to flow away pretty quickly on their own. It's a warning signal. It's kind of like, I've had a friend of mine talk about this before, is that emotions are like the dashboard of your vehicle. When it tells you that when a light lights up saying that you're out of fuel, to panic about it doesn't work. What do? You go put fuel in it, and then that light goes away. So when you're feeling these things and you acknowledge them and you recognize them, you honor them, they generally tend to go away. When you stew about them, when you obsess about them, and sometimes even when you try to ignore them, that's when they morph or manifest into what people are calling manufactured emotions. A good example that I've read about is a lot of people talk about guilt or regret. And that is a manufactured emotion. So the grief that you feel if someone that you care about passes away, that's real. The sadness is there. The uncontrollable grief, that I'm going to scream and cry and wail for a year, that's pretty manufactured, because your body you got the message, but you're kind of creating this layer and layer and layer and layer. But then also, what about things like, well, I was never as nice to this person as I should have been, or I should have made more time to go see them, or, oh man, the last time that I saw them, we fought, or I wasn't as good a role model. Whatever the narrative that you have, when you lose something, that's where regret comes from. That's where guilt comes from. It is manufactured, and it is never helpful. I mean, I don't see a situation. I know that there are people who say, well, guilt is helpful. I mean, I guess in theory, if you stew about an action that you've done or something that you've done long enough, and you stew about it, and it creates a level of guilt, and then that guilt forces you into action. Well, I guess action to fix a problem is always good. But in the grand scheme of things, sitting around and stewing over something and feeling guilt or remorse or regret is not helpful, right? It's not helpful. When you, when you see, and I think I touched on this on the other video the other day, when you see a colleague or a friend get a really big promotion, or something really amazing happens to them, or they get a new car or something, you might get an instant reaction of joy. You might even have an instant reaction of, I don't know, frustration or something. Maybe it's an immediate reminder of maybe where you're there or you're not there yet, or something, or reminds you of something that you don't have in your life. But as you stew on that, and that turns into bitterness, and that turns into resentment or jealousy, those are manufactured. Those are the types of things that get us in trouble, right? Regret, resentment, long-term anguish. Those are the kinds of emotions that tend to take on a life of their own and absolutely control you. And I don't care what anybody says. If you allow your emotions to control you, it is not a good thing. I'm sorry, I just don't buy it. I think they serve their purpose, but that's about it. So I like to try and think about, what am I feeling? And is this a naturally occurring reaction, or am I creating a manufactured reaction? And I'll be completely honest with you. I had a situation over the past couple days that really bothered me. And, there are some people that are probably listening to this or watching this that know what I'm talking about. I participate in a men's group. I put something out there, and although I got a lot of good, positive reaction, I also got a lot of criticism. And my first reaction was a bit of disappointment and, a little bit of frustration. But I allowed that to turn into something more. I allowed that to turn into frustration and resentment and anger. And that's not cool. And it causes me to generally react in a way that, looking back on it, I'm not proud of the way that I reacted to this situation personally. Some people said, oh, that was the natural reaction. No, it's not. Disappointment is the natural reaction. Anger, frustration, resentment, nope, that's manufactured. And then here's the spiral, right? So then you go, oh, I wish that I hadn't done that. Oh, I regret how I acted. I'm going to feel sorry for myself. Fuck, that's more manufactured emotion. Stop it, right? This thing happened. I feel this way. What am I going to do about it? Stop the cycle of compounding emotions. It doesn't accomplish anything. So watch for those. And don't be a slave. Well, don't be a slave to any emotion, but allow those natural emotions to happen. Feel them, use them, and then move on. Do not allow the manufactured emotions to take hold. If they do start to take hold and you are conscious and aware enough to do something about it, brilliant, good. Make something out of it, but on their own, they are not good things. The last thing that I want to touch on, because again, it's an argument that a lot of people make about this, because people like to try to cut this down, and that's fine. And I also read about this in an article but something that is naturally occurring doesn't mean that you have the right to act on it. Okay? So here's the easy one that I think a lot of people get wrong. Sadness and pain makes you cry. You have the right to act on that. If you feel like this thing requires that you cry, if it makes you cry, so be it. Cry. Don't cry forever. There is a point at which crying no longer serves a purpose. This is where you feel the emotion and then you move on with it. But let's say you see a pretty girl walking down the street and that creates a sense of lust. That's a pretty natural reaction, right? Men and women, we like good-looking things. We feel that attraction. We feel that lust. There isn't a situation in the world where you can just blindly act on that because you feel it and it's natural. So when we try to cut down arguments and we try to go, yeah, but, what about this, what about that? Well, yeah, but if you're hurt or you're sad, you should be allowed to cry. People have to be able to allow their emotions to control them sometimes. No. You allow them to flourish, you allow them to exist sometimes. But you need to be in control. Because when we do let our emotions run wild, that's when people do dumb shit like murder and rape and assault, right? That's where hatred comes from. That's where racism and xenophobia comes from. It's from emotions that are manufactured that are allowed to spiral. And then you throw on other things and it's like kerosene on a fire. So no, you don't have the right to always act on an emotion just because it is naturally occurring. You have the right to feel, but you sure as hell better be in control. Have fun with that. Think about it. Let me know what you think. Let me know what kind of emotions it may have stirred up. And otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow.